Part 3, Psychedelic Breakthroughs, a Great Awakening Starting Point. Despite what meditation purists say, if you want a mystical experience immediately, psychedelics provide the most reliable pathway. The natural methods laid out in this book are highly effective, especially with proper transmissions from advanced frequency holders. But even those can often take weeks, months, or even, for the rare few, years to produce your first crucial mystical experience. To understand why psychedelics offer such a direct route, you need to know what constitutes a true breakthrough. Now, at the end of this book and the video series, if you're watching online, I put together an in-depth general guide on how to use psychedelics safely for awakening, which is worth exploring if it calls to you to choose this part as your path. A breakthrough is the complete dissolution of ordinary reality and ego consciousness, where you transcend the physical world entirely and enter pure consciousness or otherworldly dimensions. It feels like dying or being reborn. Your sense of self completely vanishes, time becomes meaningless, and you merge with infinite awareness or even encounter non-human entities. People say it's the deepest experience you can have, feeling even more real than normal life. You might see endless patterns and shapes, meet strange beings, revisit your life, or feel directly connected to the divine. One moment you feel like a wise sage who understands the universe, and the next you realize you've just spent hours talking seriously to your houseplant. And no one knows this more than Michael Pollan. When Pollan began researching for his book, How to Change Your Mind, he faced a classic investigative challenge. As a respected journalist and best-selling author in his 60s, Pollan had built his reputation on thorough, first-hand research. But if he were going to write a book on psychedelics, he knew he wasn't going to be able to accurately report on consciousness-altering experiences without actually having them. So he designed his own controlled experiments with clear protocols and specific learning objectives, got together a few experience guides, and systematically explored drugs like LSD, psilocybin, and DMT under safe, supervised conditions. And it completely rocked his world. Pollan discovered that psychedelics function as what he calls reset buttons that, quote unquote, shake the snow globe for consciousness, temporarily dissolving habitual thought patterns and enabling fresh perspectives on familiar experiences. They are precision instruments, creating first insight experiences in realms and dimensions more real than reality itself. However, Pollan identified the critical flaw in psychedelic romanticism as the assumption that the temporary dissolution of ego boundaries automatically translates into permanent shifts in how we navigate ordinary reality. These substances serve as catalysts rather than solutions, Pollan said. They are powerful tools to create these incredible breakthrough moments, but you have to then develop sustainable systems and practices to maintain progress without external dependencies. True transformation, he said, demands the unglamorous work of integration and sustained development. This perspective aligns perfectly with the strategic approach outlined in this book and echoed by all of my master mentors. Deploy these powerful catalysts when genuinely called to either kickstart an awakening or conduct the necessary spiritual check-in, refresher, months or years into the path. The goal remains in transcending dependence on them entirely. As Ram Dass said, psychedelics showed me the possibility, but you can't stay high on psychedelics forever. The work is to become the person who lives in that awakened state. Ram Dass learned this lesson in 1967 when he brought pure LSD to India and gave his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, 900 micrograms of the substance, enough to make reality look like a Salvador Dali painting having a seizure. Neem Karoli Baba casually swallowed all of it at once, and it had absolutely no effect on him. Zilch. Nada. He simply laughed it off as if nothing had ever happened. 3 years later, Ram Dass returned to India and gave Neem Karoli Baba 1,200 micrograms, and again, he remained completely unaltered. Got anything stronger? He chuckled. What Ram Dass had seen after picking his jaw up from the Mumbai floor was that true spiritual realization transcends the effects of psychedelics entirely. The states these substances reveal are already accessible through sustained practice. And for a fully awakened, God realized being, these medicines cannot alter what is already permanently transformed. If you're in Chicago, you don't need to take a bus to Chicago, Ram Dass said, he realized after that day. I want to quickly add here that there are quote unquote levels of consciousness, which we will cover later. Neem Karoli Baba was one of the most God realized individuals of the 20th century. And even someone as awakened as Toll or Eva would likely get blasted to the center of the universe on that same dose that he took. Essentially, what I'm pointing to is that even among the enlightened, there are levels. What blows the mind of one awakened soul might barely register to another who's far deeper in the game of the consciousness up-leveling. This encounter marked Ram Dass's pivot from psychedelic exploration to devoted spiritual practice. It perfectly illustrates the ultimate purpose of these tools, to show you what's possible, that inspire you to do the unglamorous daily work of becoming that permanently. Look at any genuine master, and you'll see the same progression. None of my mentors currently depends on these substances, let alone uses them often or even sporadically. And a vast majority hadn't touched them in years, if ever. When you are high on your own supply, psychedelics can become redundant. Remove the barriers to the true self, just as psychedelics do, and you can tap into many of the same experiences, teachings, downloads, and astral travel these medicines offer without needing the chemical key. My life feels basically like a mushroom trip, Shannon once told me with a trademark bubbly delivery of hers. With that said, many of my teachers had begun their spiritual journeys through encounters with drugs during periods of unconscious wandering. Some had stumbled into awakening through recreational use in the counterculture movements of the 1960s and 70s, while others had achieved the highest states of consciousness through purely natural means, never requiring psychoactive assistance. What struck me was their universal absence of condemnation. Each master recognized psychedelics as legitimate catalysts capable of accelerating consciousness development when applied with proper intention. Several still engage with plant medicines, occasionally, but not from necessity, but from genuine enjoyment, acknowledging that even advanced practitioners could even receive unexpected teachings. Gareth Dignam, my very first master teacher, and the man who kickstarted my Ferrari speed awakening with his Sat Force transmission, told me about the time he decided to completely annihilate his human identity through a 90-day juice fast. He shares the same uncompromising intensity that defined all my masters, treating awakening like a life or death mission rather than a hobby. A true spiritual badass. After starving his ego into submission for 3 months, he then decided it was time to celebrate and party by taking a hero's dose of mushrooms, which is about 5 grams. And it merged him completely with the Divine Mother. He described it as every single cell in my body becoming a supernova of infinite love. Gareth landed in Brahman consciousness not long after that. He doesn't screw around, that Irishman. So is a psychedelic experience necessary for awakening? Of course not. This should be painfully obvious to anyone who has studied the great traditions, even superficially. The masters of Tibet, the Desert Fathers, the Sufi saints, none of them needed external substances to achieve profound realization. I have numerous friends who've used the transmission, energy work, teachings, and meditation methods outlined in this book to achieve rapid awakening without ever touching drugs or plant medicines. The non-psychedelic path is not only viable, but it can forge genuine resilience since you are developing skills without chemical assistance. And consciousness can sometimes get stuck comparing normal states to those mystical experiences. Sometimes an untainted mind sees more clearly. That's the beauty of having multiple paths up the same mountain. You get to choose which route is most comfortable for you. Don't listen to the Sherpas. Be your own Sherpa. And if you're carrying significant psychological baggage, trauma, PTSD, deep neurotic patterns that sabotage your development. Psychedelics offer massive leverage. Why spend years in traditional therapy, slowly chipping away at trauma, when you can clear enormous amounts of material in one or two guided sessions? Now, that's again, not bashing therapy, but always remember to keep your therapy, but have an outside the box thinking about different methods to reach trauma clearings and higher states of consciousness, such as psychedelics and transmissions. Research shows strong evidence that psychedelic therapy can work much faster than traditional methods. Studies from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, found that just one session of MDMA assisted therapy can sometimes achieve what normally takes years. In phase 3 trials, 67% of people with PTSD no longer met the criteria for the disorder after treatment, and about 86% showed major improvement. This is a huge breakthrough for conditions that have resisted normal treatments for decades. Jonathan Robinson, founder of the Enlightenment Project and author of Ecstasy as Medicine, is on a mission to help wipe the grim meat hook hold that PTSD has on its victims through guided MDMA therapy. Robinson told me that his network of therapists trained in guided MDMA sessions produces significant PTSD reductions in 90% of participants, often in just one Zoom session. The broader research confirms these extraordinary outcomes. Psilocybin studies show 80 to 90% of participants with treatment-resistant depression experiencing significant symptom reduction, with benefits lasting months after treatment. For cancer patients facing end-of-life anxiety, 60 to 80% showed dramatic improvements in death anxiety and depression that persisted for 6 months or longer after a single session. The implications are staggering. What conventional therapy might take years to resolve, these medicines can address in hours. By releasing trauma patterns trapped in the nervous system, they free people to move past old wounds and access deeper spiritual work that might otherwise remain out of reach. Unfortunately, despite this overwhelming evidence, regulatory approval remains elusive. As of mid-2025, MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD has not yet been approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, marking a frustrating chapter in the effort to legalize these medicines for therapeutic use. MDMA remains a Schedule I substance with no accepted medical use, forcing those seeking relief to risk arrest or dangerous street drugs. Big Pharma is a multi-hundred-billion-dollar industry that depends on chronic conditions and repeat customers. They'd rather have us hooked on medications than manage symptoms indefinitely than offer treatments that actually heal people quickly. The last thing they want is people waking up to their true nature, because awakened individuals don't make good consumers of their products. When someone discovers they can access profound healing and expanded consciousness through these medicines, they're no longer dependent on the pharmaceutical treadmill, like I was, and still slightly am. Big Pharma simply can't profit off people who heal completely in a few sessions, rather than staying medicated for years. There's also the deeper threat that awakened people naturally start questioning everything, including the systems designed to keep them dependent and distracted. A population that's discovered its own inner healing capacity and true nature is much harder to control and monetize. The regulatory resistance starts to make perfect sense when you follow the money. For now, pioneers like Robinson and the scientists at MAPS lead the charge toward the inevitable moment when we'll legalize our most effective healing compounds. And if your faith forbids psychedelics, you're scared out of your mind of having a nightmare trip, or you live in the middle of nowhere with zero connections to drugs, don't stress. The natural techniques in this book will get you there just fine.